Welcome. I'm Fiona Coffey, Associate Director for Programming and Performing Arts at Wesleyan Center for the Arts. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you this evening to Baldwin and Buckley at Cambridge, a conversation about history and process with elevator repair service. This evening's event is co-hosted by our theater department and the Center for the Arts. So it was about, I think, January of 2020, just before the COVID-19 pandemic closed theaters around the world, when theater professor Ron Jenkins and I saw an early open rehearsal of a new work by the renowned theater company Elevator Repair Service. They presented an excerpt of a new show they were developing, Baldwin and Buckley at Cambridge. Actors Greig Sargeant and Ben Williams performed an extraordinarily moving verbatim excerpt from the original debate between civil rights activist James Baldwin and the father of modern American conservatism, William Buckley. This performance in 2020 created an incredible echo between the language and rhetoric being used in 1965 and much of the contemporary national conversations around race and equity in America today. It was a performance filled with emotion, expression, desire, and an impassioned assertion of civil rights that we felt was important for our Wesleyan students and community to experience. We plan to bring Baldwin and Buckley at Cambridge to Wesleyan in February of 2022. And in the meantime, we are thrilled to host a conversation with Greig Sargeant, Ben Williams, and John Collins tonight to learn more about the production and their process. The discussion will be moderated by Assistant Professor of Theater, Katie Pearl, and theater major Fitzroy Pablo Wickham, who was just awarded a 2021 Rhodes Scholarship to pursue a doctorate at Oxford. So we're incredibly proud to have him with us this evening. Before we start, we would like to acknowledge that Wesleyan University is located on Wangunk land. The Wangunk are the indigenous residents of land on both sides of the Connecticut River, including Mattabesset, now known as Middletown. We recognize and respect the relationship between the Wangunk and this land as we work towards a more equitable community for all. Our guests are joining us today from the lands of Wappinger, Mohegan, and Lenape. All who come here are welcome in this space today. Please feel free to put your name in the chat along with the land you're located on. If you do not know the land you're located on, you can look it up on the website that we're going to throw into the chat for you guys right now. And with that, let's get the evening started.
I say you might.
Yes, my dear. Now, I'll open it.
Argument in the Seventh Circuit, the state repeated this point over and over again.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's program. We're so happy to have you. I'm your co-moderator, Fitzroy Pablo Wickham. I'm a senior here at Wesleyan University, and I'm a theater major.
And I'm your other co-moderator this evening. My name is Katie Pearl, and I'm an assistant professor of theater here at Wesleyan.
Today, we'll be meeting and talking with a few of Elevator Repair Service company members. Let's bring them up on the screen. First, we have John Collins. John Collins founded Elevator Repair Service in 1991. Since then, he has directed or co-directed all of the company's productions, while also serving as the company's artistic director. Next, we have Greig Sargeant. Greig Sargeant is a company member of Target Margin Theatre and has been with Elevator Repair Service since 2007. And finally, we have Ben Williams. Ben Williams has been an actor with ERS since 2004 and a sound designer. He produces and curates Category Other, an award-winning platform for experimental audio. Hello, John, Greig, and Ben.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for having us.
We're so happy to have you. For more information on these individuals, you can read their complete bios by visiting the CFA website. Please see the link posted in the chat.
So thanks, Pablo, and welcome, everyone. I'm going to dive right in and just start asking. I'm going to ask each of you a question to get things started. So I'm going to begin with you, John. So ERS, as we saw in that great video you guys put together, is a company known for collaborative theater making, show hatching, what people call devised theater now. And you started it 30 years ago, before devised theater was like a buzzword. And I know that students here at Wesleyan, and I personally am really interested in that kind of work. So what was your dream when you began it, and how has the idea of the company changed over time?
Well, right, it's true. We'd never heard of that word before. And at a certain point, I mean, the devised theater word, and at a certain point I was like, oh, that's something they do in England. But it sounds like what we do over here. And then eventually everybody used that word. But no, at the time, I mean, in 1991, when I was just out of college, I think I had a couple of things in mind. I mean, that were sort of both extremely ambitious and extremely humble at the same time. The ambitious part was that I was a huge fan of the Wooster Group, and I had been reading a lot about them and the work of theirs that I'd seen, I'd really loved, and I wanted to know how they made that, like how they created these things on stage that completely confounded my expectations of what theater was, and in a really joyful way. And when I read about them and learned more about them, I learned that they made their work as a group, that they made their decisions as a group, they worked as an ensemble. There was a kind of, not so much democracy about how they did things, because they certainly were led by a strong leader in Elizabeth LeCompte, but there was a kind of chaotic consensus to how they made work, and that really appealed to me. And that gets to the sort of humble part of it, which is that at that age, at 21, I think I didn't have the courage to even hold an audition. You know, I didn't want to recruit people to work with me that I didn't know. I wanted to work with the people I knew and trusted. So there was something that really appealed to me about working in a tight-knit ensemble, because I could start that with the people I had around me, with the tiny little bits of space I had around me, with just what I had. And I think the Wooster Group example, and others, there were other ensemble theaters that I learned about then that, kind of gave me the inspiration, but also permission to work outside of a kind of conventional professional hierarchy. So that was really where it started, was, sort of with a long-term ambition in mind of having a successful ensemble, which I didn't really understand. I didn't understand what that meant. At the time I thought, oh, that means I'll have sort of a rock band, and these 7 people will be with me in 30 years. And a few of them still are, but but I guess to answer that other part of your question, I mean, that's how it's changed. I mean, I think to have an ensemble means not necessarily that you have the same people exactly who were there 20, 30 years ago, but that you treat every group of people that comes together to make a show as a permanent ensemble. And I think it took a while to learn that lesson that, it didn't have to be, a permanent secret club.
Yeah.
Even though that's appealing in some ways. It was more that you brought a group of people together and you made that group of people, the primary resource for the work that you made.
Yeah, the people who are watching right now, hi again, everybody. John re-edited the video that kind of prefaced this whole event, and the original video had a list of these ensemble members, and it was like 1,000 people.
Right. I mean, I think we made that video for a big anniversary gala, and we wanted to acknowledge everyone who had contributed over the years. So we did get a long list, and it is a long list of people. And that's a thing that I think if you had told me that in 1991, I might have been disappointed. Like, oh, what happened to this great little group of 8 people we started with? But the fact that so many people have been able to be involved and contribute over time is a badge of honor.
Well, let's bridge over to Ben and Greig with that comment. So, Greig, maybe you can start. How did you become a company member? But how do you feel what John was just talking about, like the ensemble of every project or feeling permanent within it? How have you lived that out?
Well, first of all, I've known John for 30 years.
Okay.
We were a part of a show with another theater company called Target Margin Theater. So I've known John for a very, very, very long time. And in 2007, an opportunity came up to be a part of a show that they were developing, William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury. John called me and asked me to be a part of it, and I was thrilled. Though I was so excited to finally start working with ERS and to work with John again, I thought for a second that perhaps I wouldn't be able to do it because my mother was very sick at the time and she passed away. I called John to tell him that my mother was very sick and I would have to withdraw from the project, and he would not let me do that. He held the part for me. So when we talk about ensemble and knowing people and being a very close knit, that's the kind of environment it is. He held that part for me, and in a way saved me because it was a very difficult time in my life, losing my mother.
Yeah.
And I've been with him ever since 2007. So.
Yeah. That's amazing. There's so much we can dig into there, but I'm going to bridge over to Ben just to bring your voice into the Zoom a little bit. One of the quotes that was in that video was called ERS, longtime masters of collaging, found text to dance and intricate soundscapes. And I know that you're also, sound is really interesting to you. So as an actor,
and dance.
And sound designer, how have you found your way through this thing of like collaging all these different parts of theater as opposed to like, here's a play with a script?
I think it's, for me, and probably for the company too, it started with not really having an idea of where we were going to go, you know, but of just focusing on what was happening now and what, you know, working through the moment. And when I first started, the thing that ERS needed was somebody to run the sound, because at the time John was running the sound for what became GATS. And he was like, yeah.
You want to talk for a second about what GATS is? Just tell the people.
GATS is an 8-hour verbatim staging of The Great Gatsby, which had many attempts and encounters. I guess ERS, John, was it in 1998 that you guys first started?
99.
Something, yeah. So one of those little squares in the preview video showed a showing from 2003 at the Collapsible Hole space out in Williamsburg, which is no longer there. And that was where I first saw them working on like a 20-minute version of The Great Gatsby at the time. And John was running the sound for that. And so at the time I asked them, you know, do you guys need help with anything? And John said, yeah, I need somebody to run sound. And I was like, well, you know, I'm really an actor. And he's like, yeah. Well, hang on. So I started off learning sound, and John, I didn't know anything about sound design then. John taught me everything I knew at that point. And, you know, quickly I also ended up on the stage and being an actor in the show as well.
It's two really different examples. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just reiterating how John's point of like, it came out of this position of chaos, of not really having an idea of what the final thing was going to be, you know.
And also to what Greig was saying, like two different ways of committing to the idea of an ensemble. Like, oh, this board sound guy who's running sound is also going to stick around and eventually be an actor, is another way of honoring relationship within performance. Hey, Pablo, do you want to take us to this next section?
Most definitely, Katie. Sounds like an amazing team, and the things that you do, the projects, they're just really wonderful. And that's why we brought you here, you know, specifically to talk to us about a piece that you're developing based on what you call found text. And in this case, it exists as a video, a debate between James Baldwin and William Buckley at Cambridge University all the way back in 1965. You know, the two gentlemen, they were debating the question, does the American dream come at the expense of the American Negro? A question that could be asked today, 50 years later. So, Greig, can you talk to us about the initial idea for Baldwin Buckley? Can you talk to us about the project and, you know, how did it start?
Well, it started, I'm very proud to say this story because it started with me following my heart and saying no. And what I mean by that is John very kindly offered me a role in another show that Elevator Repair Service is developing. I thought about it. I spoke to him about it. I was honored to be offered the role, but I decided that I wasn't the right person in the company to play this role. And for the first time in my 30 plus odd year career as an actor, I said no to like a major role. At which point John said to me, well, Greig, what would you like to do? You just never hear that. People don't come up to you and say, well, what would you like to do? As if I was amazing. George Clooney. I'm not George Clooney, I'm Greig Sargeant. And so
you are me.
and so I said to myself, oh my gosh, well, nobody's ever asked me this question before. What am I going to say? And then I remembered one thing. I said to myself, many years ago, my dear friend's father said to me, Greig, at some point, you have to play James Baldwin. That was an idea that was always in my head. And I'll get into later why that was such an important thing. But the other thing was that during that time period, I had just seen a show at the Vineyard called Is This a Room? Directed by Tina Satter. And it was a show that was based, the source material was an FBI transcript. And I found it very relevant to today. I found it highly theatrical, and the truth of the whole piece really struck me. So I said to myself, I want to find something truthful with James Baldwin. So then I started looking and reading interviews, and I went on to YouTube, and then I came across the debate, which I did not know about before, never heard of it, started watching it, and then getting very, very angry as I was watching this debate. Is this a good time to say, roll the clip, Joe?
When I was growing up, I was taught in American history books that Africa had no history, and neither did I. That I was a savage, about whom the less said the better, who had been saved by Europe and brought to America. And of course, I believed it. I didn't have much choice. Those are the only books there were. Everyone else seemed to agree. If you walk out of Harlem, ride out of Harlem downtown, the world agrees. What you see is much bigger, cleaner, whiter, richer, safer. And it would seem then, of course, that it's an act of God, that this is true, that you belong where white people have put you.
It seems to me that of all the indictments Mr. Baldwin has made of America, here tonight and in his copious literature of protest for the fire next time, in which he threatens America, he didn't, in writing that book, speak with the British accents that he used exclusively tonight, in which he threatened America with the necessity for us to jettison our entire civilization. The only thing that the white man has that the Negro should want, he said, is power.
And so I watched it, was so angry about it that I was like, okay, this is good. Let me see if I can try and find the transcript. I found the transcript. I called John and I said, John, take a look at this transcript. So, John, you can take it from here.
Oh boy, I have such a hard time remembering how the early details of these things unfold. And I'm glad you have a better memory of that than I do. Obviously, you do. But yeah, one thing, of course, that first of all, I mean, I was also really moved by it. I hadn't seen it either, and was just floored by Baldwin's half of the debate. But not for nothing, I was also really intrigued, sort of perversely by Buckley's half, not because I found anything persuasive about it, but because it sounded familiar. It sounded familiar to me, as these arguments were not alien to the 21st century, and that was, of course, troubling. But it made the combination of the powerful eloquence of Baldwin's speech and the familiar ring of Buckley's arguments made the whole thing feel like something not the least bit historical, but present, very much of the moment. And of course, this was in late 2019. So I don't think we were at all prepared for how, I mean, in a way, it didn't matter. This thing felt fully relevant to us.
Well, it was definitely relevant for me, being a Black man and seeing this debate that happened in 1965 and thinking to myself, I could have this debate today, and thinking that in all this time, what has really changed and what is going on? This was all before, the world went even crazier with the stuff that happened in the months to follow. But, the impetus and the drive to push this project forward was based on people needed to hear this conversation again and be reminded.
Definitely agree.
And so how, as actors, you had these incredible personages that you were looking at. When you began to approach the piece, was it, what actor tools were you using? Was it like, let me step into the character of Baldwin? Was it caricature? Was it empathy? Like, am I supposed to feel empathetic with Baldwin now?
Okay, so okay, let me just give you a little background. My parents are from a third world country in South America. They came to the United States in the late 50s, early 60s with a single-minded vision to have the best possible life, to be surrounded by the best possible opportunity to get what they wanted out of life. And they instilled that in their children. At a very young age, my mother was very worried about me because I guess I realized at a very, very young age that I was different and I was treated different, and I didn't like that. Education was the most important thing in growing up in my household. My parents strove so hard to educate, to get to give the and to receive the best education that they could possibly give to their two children. And so when I was 7 years old, I moved to an all-white town in Long Island, which had an incredible public school system. And when we first moved there, my parents sat my sister and I down and said, basically, there are people in this town that are very, very upset that we have moved to this town. You are not to be angry. You are not to have an opinion. You have to be the representatives of your race. I was 7 and my sister was 6. So my entire life has always been, I've always been conscious about race and always angry that I had to be so conscious about race, and that, everything I was doing was being watched and studied, and the moves that I would make would affect others. And so seeing that piece and seeing James Baldwin so articulate in his argument about the American Negro, I really didn't have to do very much except repeat those words and feel those feelings that are so relevant today. I didn't have to do any acting work. All basically I need to do is just stand there and get the message out. But it is so close to me. And I'm so grateful that, I have the opportunity to share his message with so many people. That's basically all I have to say.
And it is a very powerful message. And as you were saying, John, earlier, that it's a familiar message because even today it's still very relevant. Could you talk to us a little bit about how you thought about bringing this to public life?
Well, we, for a long time, ERS has sort of favored research as a way of generating material for our work. It's not always how we make a show, but a lot of the work that we've done, when we are working on something that's a transcript or a found text of some kind like that, it does give us the opportunity to, and for me personally, to just learn a lot about that, to become a student of what we're making a show of. So in a way, we like to let that sometimes kind of random path of the process, or the random path of the research, let's say, take us to where the show is going to be. And there's a lot of free association involved. And I think one of the early bits of productive free association was that when we looked at that, I said, well, you know what, we've done something else that featured William F. Buckley as a character. And one Ben Williams does a really spot on Bill Buckley. So let's get Ben involved in this piece. And of course, Ben is also one of our sort of most skilled behind the scenes dramaturg researchers. So I thought Ben would be a really good person to have involved with this. But we go at something like this without an agenda about how exactly we want the thing to look when it's done. We don't start with a blueprint that way. We start with this material that we want to have a really genuine encounter with, and so, I mean, I say all this with a big asterisk, because we have not been able to do very much work of the kind we normally do on this piece, because that kind of work is done with all of us in the same room. And we've had that maybe less than a week's worth of that. Go ahead, Katie.
Before you go farther into just sort of talking about how crazy development has been recently, there's a clip you brought that shows us a little bit of the piece early on when you are able to be in the same room. You want to set that up a little bit?
Sure. So we had a chance in January of 2020, as many people in New York theater know, that January is a time when there are about 10,000 festivals going on in New York, and the city is flooded with important arts presenters and producers and programmers, and everybody wants to get a show out there for them to come and see. So we thought, well, we've only had a few days together on this, but we love this material so much, and we think, we should put it out there right now. And so before we did much of anything else, we had a reading, and so maybe we can show a little bit of that right now at Aprons Arts Center.
It would seem to me the proposition before the House, when I put it that way, is the American dream at the expense of the American Negro, or the American dream is at the expense of the American Negro, is a question hideously loaded, and that one's response to that question, one's reaction to that question, has to depend, in effect, on where you find yourself in the world, what your sense of reality is, what your system of reality is. That is, it depends on assumptions which we hold so deeply as to be scarcely aware of them. It comes as a great shock to discover the country, which is your birthplace, to which you owe your life and your identity, has not in its whole system of reality evolved any place for you. The disaffection, the demoralization, and the gap between one person and another, only on the basis of the color of their skin, begins there and accelerates through a lifetime.
It seems to me that of all the indictments Ms. Baldwin has made of America, here tonight and in his copious literature of protest, the one that is most striking involves, in effect, the refusal of the American community to treat him other than as a Negro. There is no instant cure for the race problem in America. And anybody who tells you that there is a charlatan and ultimately a boring man. Boring precisely because he's then speaking in kind of abstractions that do not relate to the human experience.
Okay. That was great to see. So that was in January, and then in March, COVID happened, shut everything down. And I think the audience, certainly the students, are familiar with like what that means to try to develop work over Zoom and all of that. But what's particularly interesting about your show is that also what happened is the Black Lives Matter revolution. All the protests happen, and you're doing a piece that's like the father of American conservatism talking to James Baldwin about that very issue. So how did that impact the way you thought about the work, how you internally talked about it, how you're planning to present it? I can throw that to anybody. Ben.
I mean, the first response was that we were so frustrated. You know, this was the one thing that we felt like, oh my God, please let us do this show right now. You know, we had to swallow that, and we had this opportunity to reapproach the piece in a kind of video format for the Prelude Festival, which is a completely different medium. We also didn't really have time to rehearse, but we did meet over Zoom a couple times, and surprisingly to me, we actually made quite a bit of progress in kind of preliminary thinking about what to do and at least how to approach this thing as a video piece. So to the degree that, you know, we were able to have any kind of process on it, it was just really quickly, it was expedited. Everything happened really fast. I still had the Buckley tape in my ear. I had AirPods, both in the video you just saw and in the one we're about to see. I have William F. Buckley's voice in my ear, and the laptop on stage is giving me his physicality as well. But there was an evolution between what we did live at Abrams and live for Prelude. We can roll that one now, right? Can we? John, do you have to say it? Hit it.
The motion before the House tonight is the American dream is at the expense of the American Negro. Mr. James Baldwin will speak third. Mr. William F. Buckley Jr. will speak fourth. Mr. Haycock is the heir of the House.
Mr. President, sir, it is the custom of the House for the first speaker in any debate to extend a formal welcome to any visitors in the House. I can honestly say, however, that it is a very great honor to be able to welcome to the House this evening Mr. William Buckley and Mr. James Baldwin. American society has felt fit to use Negro labor. It has felt fit to use the blood of the Negro in 2 world wars. It has felt fit to listen to his music. It has felt fit to laugh at his jokes. And yet, as far as I'm concerned, it has never felt fit to give the American Negro a fair deal. And for this reason, Mr. President, I would beg to leave to propose the motion of the American dream is at the expense of the American Negro.
It is an honor to welcome 2 such distinguished speakers. It is not our purpose to oppose civil rights. It is our purpose to oppose this motion and... thank you, sir. Come collect your fee afterward. This side of the House denies that the American dream has in any way been helped by this undoubted inequality and suffering of the Negro. We maintain that, in fact, that it has hindered the American dream, and that if there had been equality, if there had been true freedom of opportunity, the American dream would be very much more advanced than it is now. Mr. President, sir, I beg to oppose the motion.
Good evening. I find myself, not for the first time, in the position of a kind of Jeremiah. For example, I don't disagree with Mr. Burford that the inequality suffered by the American Negro population of the United States has hindered the American dream. Indeed, it has. I quarrel with some of the other things he has to say. Let me put it this way, that from a very literal point of view, the harbors and the ports and the railroads of the country, the economy, especially of the southern states, could not conceivably be what it has become if they had not had, and still do not have, indeed, and for so long, for so many generations, cheap labor I am stating very seriously, and this is not an overstatement. I picked the cotton, and I carried it to market, and I built the railroads under someone else's whip for nothing. For nothing. And that I am not a ward of America. I am not an object of missionary charity. I am one of the people who built the country. Until this moment, there is scarcely any hope for the American dream, because the people who are denied participation in it, by their very presence, will wreck it. And if that happens, it is a very grave moment for the West.
It seems to me that of all the indictments Mr. Baldwin has made of America here tonight and in his copious literature of protest, the one that is most striking involves, in effect, the refusal of the American community to treat him other than as a Negro. The American community has refused to do this. The American community, almost everywhere he goes, treats him with a kind of unction, the kind of satisfaction, at posturing carefully for his flagellations of our civilization, that the situation in America where the Negroes are concerned is extremely complex as a result of an unfortunate conjunction of two factors. One, it is the dreadful efforts to perpetuate discrimination. The other is as a result of the failure of the Negro community itself to make certain exertions which were made by other minority groups during the American experience. 14 times as many people in New York City born of Negroes are illegitimate as whites. This is a problem. How should we address it? By seeking out laws that encourage illegitimacy in white people? Arguments are taken.
I do, Mr. Buckley, is let them vote in Mississippi.
I agree. I couldn't agree with you more. And except, unless I appear too ingratiating, which is hardly my objective tonight, I think actually what is wrong in Mississippi, sir, is not that enough Negroes are voting, but too many white people are voting. Yes, but we must also reach through to the Negro people and tell them that their best chances are in a mobile society. And the most mobile society in the world today, my friends, is the United States of America.
They voted in favor of the motion being that the American dream is at the expense of the Negro. They voted in favor of that motion 544 persons and against 164 persons. The motion is therefore carried by 380 votes. I declare the House to stand adjourned.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that with us. I feel like we're so lucky that you all are generous and brave enough to make public your process of development and evolution of a piece. Like, you're not just waiting until the final moment to astound us all with the product. Can you talk just really briefly about like how that evolution, like where you are in the process, how that evolution happened from Abrams to Prelude? John, maybe you can take that one.
Sure. I mean, basically, even though we haven't been able to meet in person very much, we've been able to get together online, and we've been able to think about this a lot and process our reactions to it. And so some of what happened between those two performances came about because of our reactions to it. One, I think, was that we realized that to make the Buckley stuff more dangerous in a way, it needed to be less caricatured. And even though Ben is so good at pulling that almost cartoonish William F. Buckley onto the stage, we thought maybe we should try not doing that. Because if what was, if what really affected us was how familiar that felt, we didn't want that to feel like, a cartoon of something from history. Likewise, I think, and if either of you want to correct me on any of this, please do. But I think that for Greig, it was more about finding a very personal passion in it. And that his personal reaction to these things needed to be the thing that led, and not an impersonation of James Baldwin. So that was one thing that led to some of the evolution that I think you can probably read in from one of those clips to the next. Otherwise, we were reacting to things like how that we were frustrated with the fact that Buckley got the last word. Something felt theatrically unsatisfying about that. So when we did the thing at Abrams, we brought Christopher Stevenson in, who plays one of the two students who introduces them in the clip you just saw, and he and we had an interview. We did a bit of an interview that Baldwin did not long before he died, with the poet Quincy Troup. We changed our mind about that, but we did decide we would involve the speeches that were given to introduce the two guys. And since then, we've also made another decision, and I'll wrap it up with this, which is that we still had that issue with, the thing just, Buckley makes his speech, they announce the result of the vote, Baldwin wins hands down, which is, that's satisfying, but theatrically it wanted something else. We wanted some kind of theatrical response to that, and that has led us to looking into the relationship. That led us to think more about Baldwin and about Greig as these two people who are coming together in the person of Greig on stage, and having something that reflected something more personal, something more intimate, something that wasn't about moving a big audience with your incredible ideas. And that led us to thinking about his relationship with playwright Lorraine Hansberry. And so we've recruited another longtime company member, April Mathis, to join Greig for a sort of epilogue, where we've been now researching their relationship and looking at things like the eulogy that he wrote for her after she died. And that's very fruitful.
And April is amazing. I can't wait to see that. I will just put a bug in your ear that some newer Wesleyan professors who have just started a documentary theater program here, Tracy Strain is the main one, is the director of the Lorraine Hansberry documentary that just happened within the past couple of years. And she might be a great resource for you guys.
Wow. That's a great documentary.
Yeah, we can hook you guys up.
That would be fantastic. Wow.
Introducing her.
This is process right here. It's happening right here.
Folks at home are getting it live right here on the process happening for this Baldwin and Buckley debate. And those who are watching, just to remind you, you can drop questions in the comment section of YouTube. If you have questions, and Katie and I will field them to our guests. We see you out here telling us where you're from, using the indigenous map that we shared. So we know you have questions after seeing all those videos and after hearing all the conversation. So please put them in the chat. But in the meantime, I have a question for you, Ben. We heard Greig talk about his artistry in bringing in his own, sort of actor to the verbatim text. In your embodiment or your portrayal of Buckley, how do you bring your artistry to that? Do you feel any empathy towards him? And does any of it resonate with you? Like, could you talk to us?
Yeah. No. Quickly. I had played him before at another ERS show called No Great Society, which was about Jack Kerouac. And Kerouac, in his last years, became a bitter conservative, belligerent and was friends
Drunk.
Drunk. Yeah, there you go. And being friends with William F. Buckley. And so when Greig called me about this in 2019, I had seen the video of the debate. I remembered that, you know, we everything was happening so fast in the development of this. Usually, the company rehearses on and off for something like a year and a half,
or two.
Yeah, or longer. And this was with work in progress showings along the way, so we get the kind of, you know, gauge of how things work. And we didn't really have that at all with this. So again, I wanted to have Buckley in my ear because I didn't want to have to freak out about reading it or trying to memorize the speech. He also talks forever. In the full unedited script, he speaks for almost like twice as long as Baldwin. What we're working with now is the BBC edit that's out there. But the empathy thing is interesting in the sense that it's something that Buckley brings up in the debate as to like, how do you solve racism in America? And he says, one of the first things you have to do is you have to care. You know, and hearing him say that is it's fascinating to me because, especially in relation to how he's been prefaced here tonight as the father of modern American conservatism. And look at where we are now with mobs of Trump people smashing the Capitol and, you know, et cetera. I think there's something akin to a kind of psychosis with Buckley saying that you have to be empathetic and putting on a mask of empathy and making a gesture of empathy, but not caring at all. And in fact, actively throughout his career was courting the vote of the Ku Klux Klan when he needed it, although trying to distance himself from people who were outwardly, ignorantly, as he would say, racist, but definitely courting racism throughout his entire life. And then contrasting that with somebody like Trump, who, you know, is, I think, incapable of empathy, right? There's something kind of like sociopathic about that, where it's just not, it's not possible. But maybe with Buckley, it's possible, but he chooses not to do it, you know? It's an interesting thing that comes up. But anyway, where we are with it now is of, you know, his words coming through in a way that sounds perhaps more normal and more, you know, less ridiculous, less theatrical, and who knows how that's going to evolve as you know, the Madison Cawthorns of the world, you know, move to the center stage, and as the face of conservatism now continues to change. But, you know, in a subtler way, it's an idea of what does it look like to be comfortable with white supremacy, you know, is another way of thinking about it.
I mean, watching the debate, Pablo and I had a watch party for people who are interested in seeing the original debate. So many of us have seen the whole thing, and it is so theatrical. And both of them, Baldwin and Buckley, are so theatrical. And then in the video that prefaced this whole thing about ERS's work, there were all these pull quotes from the paper about like how theatrical of a company you are. And so do you feel, how is this piece situated within that identity? Because it seems like you kind of want to be anti-theatrical a little bit. Like it's more about the sincerity of these individual characters, but also actors. Greig, you want to talk about that?
Well, I just want to say, you know, for me, when the project first started, I was thinking more of the lines of a recreation out of respect for Mr. Baldwin. As things progressed and the world went mad, this project became more about the testament of now. And when I was thinking about the recreation, I think about the theatricality. When I think of the testament of now, I think about the non-theatricality, getting the point across to the people that have paid their monies to come and see this show, to hear a message. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's been my evolution in the piece so far, from the reenactment to what's going on in the world.
I mean, I would just add to that I get a little self-conscious with our intro video because of course that video sort of pulls the things that pop the best in a video. And so you see a lot of us dancing and doing wild, funny, crazy things, which is not so much the thing we set out to do. It's just what sometimes a bunch of theater people in a room produces that. And that is what our reactions to our material sometimes bring us. That's where they bring us. But the thing that is consistent throughout is that we are trying to have a kind of honest engagement with the material we have, see what it does to the group of people who have come together to do it. And we're putting it on stage. And that means looking at it through a certain lens. And so, I don't think there's theatricality of like big performances, and there's theatricality of like, a kind of heightened style. But there is always a kind of baseline theatricality whenever anybody is doing anything in front of a bunch of people. And so this is, I think, going to be I am hoping and anticipating that this is going to be a powerful thing about this, that we don't have to do big, wild, crazy theatrical things. We don't have to try. We just have to see what happens when this material passes through us, and the audience has to see what happens to it when they experience those words live in 2021 or 22 or whenever they finally get to see it.
So just to talk about like putting this on a stage and talk about the theater aspect of it all, I have a question from Christopher Gobe, and it says, how are you thinking so far about the set, the atmosphere of this re-performance of this debate?
What I've thought from the beginning, and it's partly, in a way, it's a response to the experience of doing the reading we did at Abrams in January of 2020, the first performance clip we showed. We had no lights in that theater. We had lights. We didn't have the opportunity to have like a theatrical lighting design. So what we had was just the lights on, every light on in the room. And so the audience had as much light on it as the actors did. And there was something really powerful about all that light on the people listening. And that stuck with me. And the combination of that and the image of the original debate, where whenever you see them, they're surrounded by the faces of people listening. So my scenic idea for this thing is the audience. I want, whenever you watch Ben or Greig or Chris or Gavin or April, right? Make an exception for April, but whenever you watch the debate section, you are also watching all the people other people who are watching it. And so it's just a way of sort of hammering home that idea that this is something you're hearing right now. You are here. All these other people are here. For the epilogue, I do want it to retreat into something a little bit more like a memory, something more private. So scenically for that, I am imagining that the audience, in some sense, the look will change, but so that we have a kind of counterpoint to all of that and something more intimate. But we've yet to make that part yet, so we'll see.
Our hope and our intention is to be able to bring that finished product to Wesleyan next year.
Can't wait.
Yeah, it's going to be great. You'll have to watch it transatlantically, Pablo. But this has been an amazing introduction to what that will be. And I just want to thank all of you so much, John, Greig, and Ben. Thank you. Thank you also to the Center for the Arts here at Wesleyan for setting it up, the care with which you held this whole event. Pablo, thank you for co-moderating.
Thank you, Katie.
And I think that we will sign off and say goodbye.
Thanks so much for having us, you guys.
Thank you. This has been such a great experience.
Have a good night, everybody.
You too.